welcome into episode 2 of our series talking about zero trust network access, how it affects your environments. We're continuing to talk about this migration that we're helping a lot of our customers and prospective customers and partners on, which is this migration from maybe what is called traditional VPN to the modern VPN. We call it Cloud Secure Edge, and we're going to talk about, maybe what's changed and why it's happening and what to do from here and answer some questions along the way. So, Wayson, we're talking about then versus now. We're talking about this conversation that secure access has changed and the fact that, maybe in the past using an appliance-based VPN, network level access has shifted. Maybe from your perspective, and the last time we talked about that migration from antivirus to EDR, and the fact that, we're kind of in the similar transition now, but, from your perspective, what's this look like now? And what do you see as maybe what would be called legacy to what is current?
When I think about this, or was looking in specifically around our topic today, around the why, and we did talk a little bit about going from AV to EDR, but kind of expanding more on that. When you really look at a lot of what's been occurring over the last several years, especially in the VPN space, right? And it's really not one vendor. There's a lot of vendors getting attacked nowadays, and when you really look at and kind of distill it down, it's nothing that the vendors did or that your VPN solution did changed really. I keep going back to the landscape changed, right? And the architecture didn't. The threat model changed, and it's just getting exposed there. And you kind of go expand and go further into when you think about other things outside of this specific topic around tech but security, focused. There's been a lot of things that have come out where, I think of something like on-prem exchange, for example, right? Where that was just the cornerstone for many years, and then it started to get there started to be a lot of issues with that, and then eventually we moved to the cloud, and so those type of things that it was under attack, and we shifted our focus and changed. Think about flat networks and segmented networks. WannaCry, right? It shifted a lot and exposed a lot when that came. So when you look at a lot of different areas here, in this specific case here, you really need to start looking at and how are you evolving with the threats that are really in place. And I keep going back to it's really about just the landscape changed, and I would say I'm not 100% sure who's on the call in terms of if you're someone in a final decision maker IT role, if you're a partner, maybe hopefully a customer of ours. But when you really think about when you start evaluating what you're looking at, I know I do in what we lead here, or what I lead here, but it just constantly knowing that landscape's changing and those threats are changing. And it's not always on specific than anything the vendor might be doing. It's just things are changing nowadays, so it's and it's at a fast pace, right?
If you're a customer, you made an investment at some point in the past in those technology solutions. I think it's important to know that it's not that investment wasn't necessary at the time, but to your point, companies close their offices and they move their stuff into these cloud, hyperscale cloud platforms like Azure or AWS or whatever, and their employees are remote and sometimes working on a corporate machine and sometimes not. That's a vastly different world than 8 years ago, right? Or 7 years ago. People were in offices, all their stuff was on a data center that the company controlled typically. So that shifted, if you're a customer. And if you're a partner, if you're a reseller, if you're a consultant and you advised your clients to, buy a technology solution like SSL VPN, for example, or a VPN concentrator, same thing, right? It's not that you made a bad recommendation at that time. That was the prevailing technology. But what we're noticing more and more is that, there needs to be an effort to move and to modernize. And that's the point of our education here. So the then would be the more legacy things, and the now is kind of moving towards these SaaS-based solutions. We talked about a couple of these things. I mean, the big ones that jump out to me, a lot of the partners and customers I talk to, that second bullet point, user friction and performance issues, right? A lot of times when you bought those technology pieces, remote work was like if if a snowstorm came through and people couldn't come into the office for a day or two, or if the office had to close for an emergency, people could still connect for work. Like that's what I think a lot of these remote tools were initially built for. And through some of the changes in the world, businesses just were like, hey, let's run on that 24/7. So that user experience isn't usually the best on those legacy technologies. Wayson, maybe from your perspective, just some of those other bullet points. I don't know if one jumps out to you, but when you think about managing maybe more legacy technologies, does any of these things resonate with you, or from your perspective on evaluating the services?
Yeah, I think number one definitely fits for me on for a couple of reasons, right? One is, as it mentions there, the downtime and the urgency. So patching today, I mean, we can have a whole webinar on continuous patching and moving to that, which is something more and more companies are doing. And so you have that in front of you. We're definitely, like most IT orgs, being asked to do more with less. And so, there's a lot of time spent doing patching, right? So you have that aspect of it. And so to me, the first one certainly catches my attention if you're in an IT org, especially a larger one. So we deploy CSE internally, right? We've shifted our entire org over to that. And so, and when we're a pretty large, mid-market company, so we're definitely not, in the the S or the smaller, medium-based companies, but we're pretty good size. And so, it's a lot of time that it takes to do that, right? And so when you move to these more SaaS-based, there's a whole component there that's certain things are eliminated. You tend to get, in any kind of SaaS and cloud-based thing too, is you tend to get your updates, you get a little bit more frequent updates, right? Where like something where a hardware, maybe a firewall, you don't do as frequent, updates. It's kind of generational, more or less. Where SaaS stuff, is much quicker, right? So as new technology comes out, you don't wait for a big deployment cycle. It gets upgraded throughout the year, right? So to me, that's another big hook to think about and to consider in terms of staying relevant, staying fresh. Partly also ties into what I just mentioned a few minutes ago about being more, the landscape's changing, and so I want a vendor who actually is making more updates frequently, and if they're actually doing that, that's just again to me a bigger benefit there. So in considering, the bullets here, that first one, definitely stands out for me.
Well, we talked about prior to this, right? For going on 30 years now, SonicWall has been trusted to secure customers' environments, specifically, the technology that was the firewall when everyone was going through that on-premise firewall. Even things as benign like content filtering, making sure people don't go to malicious websites. How are you businesses handling that, right? It's a tough ask. We did try to highlight a couple recent breaches. I think the recency type stuff, or just some of these stories, help to illustrate challenges that customers or maybe our partner community can use as lessons. I don't like picking on companies as much as I just like to try to glean the lessons. One of the cool things about cybersecurity from my perspective is that, we try to learn from the community, and because attacks happen so quickly, sometimes knowing about how they took place and what mechanisms were used, as an individual, as one company that suffers a problem, we can use that to secure the rest of the industry. There was a large IT distribution company recently that they had some initial access over like company VPN. I don't know that it's been completely documented that was it, but just kind of that system downtime. It takes days and weeks to restore. They lose a lot of their revenue generating processes because of these access tools. And, again, I think Wayson, you mentioned at the beginning, it wasn't that they were using some technology that was like failed, but it was maybe the processes of that technology that ultimately lead to the problem. And so when you think about it, Wayson, when you're looking at maybe the industry as a whole, or when you see these headline compromises, what are you trying to glean from those events that can help you?
Yeah, anything around, certainly. So our security team here and myself, we do pay attention to a lot of these breaches that happen, even if it's on technology that we may not even use, because you're always trying to learn and really and kind of correlate things over or match things over to other areas within your business, right? And so and again, it kind of goes back to the landscape changing. It is like it seems like threat actors are always one step ahead in some respects. And look, we didn't even mention, I don't think we mentioned the last time, I didn't mention earlier, AI is also changing the threat
Oh gosh.
landscape too, right? So, but even if that was like, let's say if that wasn't even, something on that you could use today, it's still, they were still always one step ahead, right? So like looking at these and kind of dialing into like, okay, wait, how did others get into trouble? And so trying to close a lot of those gaps, it's certainly something we look at here is just trying to learn as much as we can, right?
Yeah, and then I think as we go into that next comment, you talked about patching and the urgency around patching. This VPN attack, the VPN vulnerability that took advantage of an organization. It's a CVE that was disclosed in maybe 2025 and used to run code, and you always see those ones, and those are some of the scarier CVEs that are out there. But you're talking about the fact that maybe there was fixes for some of these products, but getting it deployed and widely adopted and updated at a pace is a challenge for organizations.
Yeah, definitely. It does dial into like the patch area, but misconfiguration, you definitely see it a lot, right? And like CVE, I think today, I don't know, others may have a different opinion on it, but CVE to me is it's not a bad word, right? I think it's a good thing that folks are highlighting, trying to get ahead of things, but it puts a lot of burden on security teams to start paying attention to those and making sure you're closing those gaps or in misconfiguration. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's an exact saying, but there's certainly I think everybody gets it around. Like the threat actors only have to be right once, and we have to be near perfect to combat them, right? And so misconfigurations can certainly get you into trouble, and certainly something we keep looking at, and just encourage others to keep on that as well, right? So it's definitely
Yeah.
a vulnerability. I think there was a little thing on your slide prior, I think, about vulnerabilities and getting those highlighted and stuff, right? So that's definitely a real threat today, right?
Well, and you've got there's a speed there, right? Sometimes I've talked to some clients that there's sometimes reasons why they can't update it, right? Closed networks, or they
Yeah.
have maintenance windows, and they built these businesses around these certain tools that are very dependent on them having uptime. And so, as our partner community and the individuals on this call go forward, you really have to evaluate the platforms you have, and are they continuous, and are they available, and what sort of flexibility do you have to expand them or create redundancies.
Yeah,
Sh-
and
Go ahead.
let me comment on something there too,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I don't know all who's joining in today, but I think like for me, I talked a little bit about last time about your CFO and money and how do what some things you can look at there, but in here, if you're a partner and you're trying to you need to change this, and maybe your customers don't want it or don't really understand it, and then if you're not a partner and you're having to go convince others, like if you work for a company with engineering, right, they have very specific things they want and specific things they do, and nobody wants change and all that. But so I'm hoping what you get out of here today is like these examples that I think if you can put together a picture of what's changing, and you don't have to get into the technology itself. It's just like so to me, I think part of what I try to do is just educate. For me, our CEO, our board, and the other executives around the company about, hey, these are the things that we're actually seeing, and here's how it's impacting us. So this is what we have to look at changing here, right? So I hope there's that some of you can get some of these kind of examples, maybe, or some of the different things I talked about earlier, to really start painting this picture of like, hey, things are changing, and this is the new model, for that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, transitioning just on that same topic, basically, though, but it's these. There's a couple of these incidents that have happened. That bottom left corner, the casino gambling reference. There's a couple of active lawsuits going against IT providers. So for the partners on the call, these are IT service providers that are currently going through a lawsuit because the third-party IT company that these folks were using gave out username and password information, or did a password reset in some examples, and allowed an attacker to use ultimately what ends up being a VPN to get access to things that they shouldn't. And there's a responsibility, sure, in the processes that organization has in place. But when you think about it, if they were only relying on that username and the password to authenticate these remote users, that's just not sufficient anymore. And that's the highlight that I try to call out on that. It's not that there's business processes that need to be updated, but it's not that a single mistake was made. It's the fact that we allow environments to exist where limited amounts of information give people too much privileged access. It gives them the ability to do damage, right? I think it's pretty common that those attacks would happen. I mean, I think it's casinos. That's the one we're talking about specifically here. I bet they get attacked every single day. And to your point, Wayson, there's an attacker just waiting for that one door that opens up. But you don't want that door to be a username and a password that a lot of people reuse. A lot of people don't make standard. Sometimes that those things can be forgotten about and they could exist for too long. Like, there's just too much risk there.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah.
And so the last one, we'll just wrap these up so people can read through the VPN vulnerabilities here. But Wayson, from your perspective, when you're educating the board, I think that applies to both people. If you're a partner on this and you have to educate a customer, or if you're a customer of IT manager, director of IT, you have to educate typically like a CFO or someone who controls the strategic investments of the business to like, why is this a priority over all the other things that we can do, right? And Wayson, I don't know if you have perspective on educating around that, but I think identity is something that touches everybody in an organization. Most people have some sort of remote workforce today, but even when people have non-remote staff, the ability of those devices to access other information on the network is really difficult to manage with traditional tools. Maybe you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I think when you think about like threat actors and what are we talked a little bit about earlier, but the system failure, but it failed because trust. The attackers they expose something that they can abuse, right? And so when you think about like when I say our space, right, I'm talking about IT, and whether you're a vendor, whether you're MSSP or running IT here on the call, like your location, credentials, patch cycles, internal users, all these known threats. What's that trust look like in there, and really these are things that when you look at some of these kind of common themes on the slide prior, like those are the things that jump out is they're just abusing those areas, right? And so how are we adjusting and really closing the gap on those as things change, right? And I think this is a moment where we really need to start looking at really highlighting those to help change the perspectives of whomever you're internally trying to convince to move to something new, or to move to something new like CSE or an SSE kind of product. Right? So
hopefully we built this mountain of credibility around why the change is there. But I think talking about what the future looks like and what the upside is, these are the bullet points that talk about why an SSE solution or these modern products like Cloud Secure Edge that we offer, I would say benefit you, or these are the areas of the business that give you more visibility than you probably have today. And it's this concept of providing continuous trust, right? If someone fails out of one of these check boxes, we should be able to control that traffic. So obviously you need to verify who's connecting, but you also want to be able to validate the device posture, right? Are they running the EDR tool that our company supports? Are they connecting from a geography that we allow? Are they using third-party software that we do or don't want? And then that part's like the profile of the device, right? That's just let's establish some sort of base level of the thing that's connecting, make sure it's a clean device. But then with the user, how easily do I give someone access to resources within the organization? And if I make a change to someone's resource, if they aren't who they say they were, or their device comes out of compliance with what I want to have access, how quickly can I enforce that to reduce what could be a more sophisticated attack on my network, or which could cause more damage? So, I mean, Wayson, maybe you can just have some commentary around this concept of moving from, traditional VPN. I hesitant to say VPN because it's just traditional connectivity where it's like, I've got my session, and once it's set up, I can do whatever I want as long as that session's alive, to this kind of more modern, flexible approach.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on some of those points about, and that's where you start getting into more of that zero trust about being able to control that access, and that never trust, always verify kind of approach here, right? Whether it's a device or what you're logging in, what you may be logging into. It's not really, you didn't really mention it, but I would just expand to also say, like, and where we're starting to do and change and how we evaluate things is like SaaS tools and third-party apps that you use, which there's all kinds of different numbers. It's kind of hard to zero in on one. It just depends whatever kind of publication you look at, but the numbers are pretty high in terms of what companies use for SaaS applications. And so these are things now that for us, we changed, right? We started to monitor that and enforce CSC on that. And so you have to go through CSC to get into that. So that's what I'd add here too, in terms of being more modern and securing access on top of your device, and being able to, like you say, and I agree, but checking on if you got the right EDR and things like that. The other additional benefit is you can set it up for some of your bigger SaaS apps too, right, as well. And in fact, I'll stay away from names, but if you look at the last kind of part of last year, the last quarter at least of 25, I mean, there's some big SaaS companies being hit now, right, from multiple angles. And so, this is just another way to get your hands around that. And again, same product, same usage here. It takes a little bit to set up, but it really, the benefit's huge, right? So.
Yeah, for those on the audience here, like if you didn't know, Cloud Secure Edge, again, I mentioned that's SonicWall's SSE product. And some of the call outs that we have, just to reference, like cloud managed, so it's always running, basically software as a service. It's delivered to you, and you don't have hardware that you have to maintain for it, and you don't have to worry about patching the devices. It's got two-factor authentication built into it, obviously, and it's doing a device trust scoring. So it's allowing you, the IT team or the channel partner, to set policy around the security level of the devices that are logging in, right? If someone's not in the geography that you support, right? They're in North Korea, or they're in Russia, or they're in, Canada, or they're in the United States, and you don't want them to be. How do you control that traffic? And is that something you want to allow? And then, something that's hard, I think, for some more legacy IT systems administrations to get their hands around, but we're talking about application level access, not just a big tunnel, not a big Ethernet cord. We can still support those tunnels, but really getting down to the granular level of just saying, hey, maybe JT on the sales team should only have access to these specific applications. And Wayson, your point, there's so many of those SaaS apps. Some of it's just like, what are people connecting to? Right. What are they even touching? I love that example you had last week, or like a couple weeks ago before the holiday break there, which was like Grammarly. No one thinks that Grammarly is a big problem, right? Everyone's just like, all right, that's a tool that people can have better crafted emails or marketing content or whatever. But the fact that the paid enterprise version has some privacy concerns that maybe your enterprise doesn't want to allow, that's a risk. And it's really hard, I think, for IT people. I don't want to speak for you, Wayson, but I think it's hard for people to know that that's even happening without a modern product.
Yeah, we're getting hit from all kinds of angles constantly, right? So yeah, it does get difficult to stay up on that on things. So the more you can, like what I like here is the more you can put trust into this new into this application, these new ways, the better it is for us to go look at and and concentrate on other things too. That's certainly coming our way, right? And so I mentioned it earlier. I got to believe a lot of you are, you being do more with less, right? And so it's just it's a constant fight.
I do want to say I've got feedback. I was reading through some of the comments about the product recently, and there is a big wave of people saying, I thought this was going to be difficult, or I thought it was going to be like refreshing my entire remote connectivity, and it was not. It simplifies it, and so they've been really happy with that.
Yeah, let me shed a little more light on that too, right?
Sure.
I'll say we have over 1,500 people, and so that's a pretty decent size IT shop to maintain, and there was the lift to get to move to CSE. It was not monumental. Did we have segments that had certain things that you had to do? Sure, there's always that, but the bulk of our users, it was not a big hurdle to get over. So yeah, I get getting that. It's not whatever comment that you're reading, whoever gave that comment, I can definitely say from a large company like us, it was not a hurdle.
I remind people it's non-disruptive, right? You can deploy it with whatever existing product solution you have in place. Non-disruptive.
Yeah, in fact, I don't know if others prescribe to kind of a crawl, walk, run deal, but you can just take 5 people and try it out and then move from there and double it, triple it, and then get the rest of the org in and so forth. So yeah, it definitely fits that model.
I know our like sales and product team, they love to boast that there's a 143% renewal rate on the product, but I think that does speak to the fact that organizations actually find more and more use cases for this solution as they grow. They find areas like, oh, we didn't even realize that this third-party contractor had access. Whoops, like there's those conversations which do happen. And you talk about improving security posture and outcomes as a partner. That's more revenue in your pocket, more managed services. It's better outcome for your customer as a whole. This could start with a single team, or a single group at your organization, very small, 5 people or 3 people, and you could get comfortable with the solution.
Yeah, so first, it's not a replacement, but it's complementing, and I think we're pretty close to. There's a connector in there to make it easier on you.
Exactly, it's an additional service with the firewall. It would replace, for many of you that use the firewall, Net Extender. So the SSL VPN service that you use maybe with the firewall or with our SMA products in the past, it would replace that function of the product. It also can take a lot of the services you use on the firewall, like content filtering, and move that to the endpoint. So you may have users that don't have a need to connect to that firewall anymore, but you still want to make sure they don't browse inappropriate websites, or you want to make sure that they don't accidentally click on a phishing link, or you want to make sure they don't go to a malware website or something like that. We have all of those tools built into the CSE agent. And so in some ways it does similar functions to the firewall, but it isn't a replacement for the firewall. You still need a firewall on premise to secure, printers and registers and all the products that are still behind that firewall. Dean mentioned, hey, can you expand on the built-in 2FA? Dean, most of the time what we see customers do is they connect it with Entra ID or their identity provider. So I would say probably in 95+% of our deployments, we will leverage the 2-factor authentication service that you use internally. We have had some of our smaller business customers ask for us to have some ability to do local Active Directory connections or a native connector. So if you have a small use case, we can support that. But for a majority of our folks, the majority of the customers we've worked with, we would leverage the Microsoft Authenticator. So for you specifically, we can reach out, we can go through that. But we have an ability to do local users. We prefer, and I think our best experience is when you connect it with Entra ID, helps with your user management. So happy to reach out and chat with you about that.
Yeah, we have another one. Yeah. Where to learn. Yeah.
So Rob, we got a couple of different options. We've got our SonicWall University for our partners, which can train you on the product. There's a series of YouTube videos available, which our team has created. It goes through the fundamentals of setting up a connector, the fundamentals of creating policies. But honestly, the product is, I don't want to say self-explanatory, but for the technical audience here, if you were to log in and just boot up the CSE console and start using the trial version of the license, or acquire like one license, I think you would figure out 85% of it. I really do think that it's like something you can learn kind of as you deploy it, but also we have content available for you. David just said, hey, it's just enjoyed the CSE product. It's more transparent than the older clients, and we deployed RDP restriction for users to help limit the security service. I mean, super common use case, and I'm glad to hear that experience, David. So thanks for sharing that with the audience. Free trial is available in my SonicWall. So when you are ready to try it, you can kick off the trial and start right away. There's an option to contact sales from there, and contact sales will push you right over to someone who can help you get a quote out as needed.
Yeah, definitely. And then for anybody, if you got questions, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm available there. So just ping me if you're on the, get some questions. So anyways, great. Thanks, JT.
Talk to you guys later.